Hi everyone. You might be surprised to see me on this channel, but yeah, it's me, Gully, at Molyneux Musings on Twitter, and I'm delighted to say that I will be sharing my tactical analysis and other forms of content on the Talking Wolves channel this upcoming season. For those that don't know me, I've been producing tactical analysis videos, player profiles, that sort of content with the Wolves Fancast over the past kind of 6 years almost now, maybe 7. And just decided that a bit of a change in scenery would be great. It's been a busy summer for me. Moved house physically and now kind of moved home digitally as well when it comes to the Wolves social media sphere. So really pleased to be able to share this content with you. And thanks firstly of all to the Fancast for giving me the platform and the profile to be able to share my content with the wider Wolves fan base. But let's get into the crux of this video that I'm going to be sharing with you as my first piece of content on Talking Wolves, and that is a slightly kind of underappreciated part of what teams should be doing, I think, in the summer. For those that already did follow me, you'll remember last season, whenever Wolves did make any moves in the transfer market, I posted an update of the squad as it stood on that day, every single iteration, basically, whether it was a departure or an incoming. And if you go back to kind of early part of last season, the very first instance of that was heavily bloated. We had a really deep squad, really big, lots of deadwood, and I think last summer's key task was to get rid of that deadwood and make sure that we freshened up the squad and kept it to a level that I think a manager would appreciate. We all know about the finances involved in terms of cutting our cloth accordingly, but I think the amount of players that we had actually on the books at that point to start the season was too much anyway. And it was a really useful exercise, whether it be within maintaining a good culture within the squad, getting rid of players who probably served their purpose at Wolves, had done all they could in the shirt, and perhaps needed a change of scenery themselves. I think last summer was a useful one. Now, it may be the case that we ended up chopping away at that a little too much, and ultimately the squad is a little bit thin on the ground as the season wore on. But I think ultimately, at the point that we ended last season, we were in a much better space than we were at the start of last summer, with obviously a different manager at the helm, and we won't go into that as we look to tackle said manager in the opposition dugout this season. But Gary O'Neill, looking forward to his first ever pre-season as a manager as well. So to kind of get into the crux of this video, like I say, I've actually listed out a bunch of players who I expect to no longer feature at the club. So looking at potential departures for this summer, we've got the likes of Kiana Herver, who, having had a look at a couple of the incomings this season already, we can expect to move on. I actually listed him as a player who I would like to have seen integrated into the squad, but unfortunately it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Luke Kundal was actually a player who was subject to a potential permanent move from what I recall last January anyway, so don't expect him to necessarily be a key member of the squad this time around either. Perhaps look at making some sort of profit on an academy product there. I have added Pedro Neto to this purely because I think the murmurings that have been going on, despite the fact that we haven't necessarily found a suitor for him at the appropriate finance at this stage, I do expect him to move on this summer, just because, again, he's one of those players that I think has achieved what he will at the club. The finances on offer to the club will be really attractive, and it allows us to really shape our squad with our new strategy under Matt Hobbs. Gonzalo Guedes is pretty self-explanatory, never really fitted in with the culture at the club, and never shown any kind of ability that he has done at previous tenures elsewhere. Daniel Podence is an interesting one. I think, I've always been quite a big fan of his, but it looks like he would want to either stay at Olympiacos or move on himself. I think he spoke out about wanting to leave anyway. In the last summer, was training away from the first team squad, etc. So whilst he is currently in Marbella with the team, it'd be interesting to see how that pans out. And then you've got Chem Campbell, who I don't think the club see as a long-term option, whether that be a loan or a sale. I think his days are numbered. And finally, Fabio Silva, who, to be honest, the less said about, the better at this point. There are some players who I expect to leave temporarily as well, who you might associate with being first-team players. Sasha Kalajdzic, unfortunate, obviously, with the injuries that he's had, won't feature for a good while yet for anyone, but it obviously will be on the books as a Wolves player at the start of the season. I don't think he'll necessarily get a permanent move until maybe next summer, but we know that Gary O'Neill isn't necessarily his biggest fan based on the minutes that he had at the club last year prior to his injury and going out on loan to Eintracht Frankfurt. But again, expect him to move on when he is fit and available. Nigel Longwick's an interesting one. He had a really good season out on loan at Plymouth last year, but we have, as you'll see, a bit of depth at centre half and some reintegration of other loan players that might mean he is a bit too far down the pecking order to really impact it. Nathan Fraser already been spoken about as a player who needs to go out on loan, and the club are actively trying to make that happen. Joe Hodge was a little bit unfortunate, having gone out on loan to QPR last season, that he didn't necessarily get the game time that he was looking for. And then Enzo Gonzalez, a player who had a bit of an injury hit first season. I think he was in and out of the under-21s, whether due to be availability. He was called up on various international camps as well. And I think he's a player that the club would probably not integrate into the first team at this point, especially again with the additions that we've made in the area of the pitch that he plays in as well. So that's kind of, I guess, the starting point from which I want to build out what I would see as the Wolves first team squad. And I've done a little bit of a squad depth chart here, which kind of shows to a certain extent that we're not in a bad place, to be honest, to start with. You can see by position, I do expect this to be the season we ultimately transition to a back four permanently. And I've highlighted all the players that kind of play in those various positions. You can see, the likes of Pedro Lima added some depth at right back, as well as Mosquera. Mosquera obviously a centre back by trade, and also you'll notice the likes of Rodrigo Gomez, who has come in, and most prominently Jurgen Strand Larsen operating down the middle of the pitch in that number 9 position. I know I've listed 3 kind of central midfielders, almost like in 2-8s, and a number 6 in the shape of that formation there, but I do see the guys listed under Bellegarde, Chirewa and Sarabia as kind of more number 10 types who could do a job in those positions if necessary. But really, you're looking at those guys being the more attacking players within that midfield 3 who can really impact the game. And I'll come on to where I think we can potentially add a little bit later on in this video. Interesting to see, I think, that the wide areas there, the longest list of players that we have on the left and the right. I think we've actually, with the arrival of Rodrigo Gomez, with the return of Chiquinho, which a little bit of a question mark there as to whether he sticks around for the rest of the season, but obviously he's again being looked over by Gary O'Neill. We've actually got quite a bit of depth compared to what we would have had at the start of last season, and this is without obviously the presence of Pedro Neto, who is obviously still a Wolves player. Now, getting into kind of position by position now, I think it's worth considering all of the various profiles that we have within the squad. And you don't just need numbers, you need different types of players for each position as well. And that's really, really important. Goalkeeper, I don't think we've got anything to really be concerned about. I've noted down here as well, homegrown players. You'll understand the squad registration rules around this. You're allowed in a registered list of 25 players, 17 are allowed to be designated as non-homegrown. So the homegrown quota is basically 8 players. And if you have anything below that number, you have to leave spaces within the squad, basically. And you'll see within ours, we have 6 players who are listed as homegrown. So ultimately, we can only name a group of 23 without adding 2 more homegrown players to that list. So you can see here, Dan Bentley and Tom King really important in terms of that quota. We know that Dan Bentley is being targeted as basically a backup in the same vein by Arsenal. But ultimately, I think with our goalkeeper situation, I don't think we're in a bad position at all. Jose Sa had a really good season last year, and I think he will continue to be a really solid number one option, barring any intervention from, as you might have read, the Saudi League and a potential really high offer that can give us a bit of scope to invest in that area. But I do think with your number one goalkeeper, it's better the devil you know to a certain extent, and the risk factors involved with bringing someone in who will need to acclimatise to the league and tick all those different boxes that Jose Sa already ticks. He's a good player still to have around. Moving on to our defenders. Now, bit of change here. We know now that Max Kilman obviously has moved on for a hefty fee. And as the player who played the most minutes out of any within the squad, didn't miss a single minute in the Premier League campaign, there is a slack that needs to be picked up there. We need someone to basically be the mainstay of our back four. I think it's the one place you want consistency within the squad above anything else. We know that in attacking areas you want a bit of variety to change things based on opposition. But if you asked any manager in the Premier League if they could name the same back four every single game in the Premier League season, they would probably bite your hand off for that. You really need that consistency of communication, understanding of playing with each other. So I do think there is a little bit of a gap there. We know, yes, Mosquera has obviously come back off the back of a really good loan at Villarreal. Santiago Bueno showed promise as well last year, and we expect his minutes to increase definitely this year as well. Totti Gomez, a really solid option, and Craig Dawson, I expect him at least at the first part of the season to be the kind of guy that pulls everything together at the back, and we need his experience to make sure that the other guys that aren't necessarily acclimatised to Premier League football really do settle down. There is a little bit of a question mark about Hugo Bueno's future at the club, and I think, and I'll highlight this kind of later on, we do need another centre half to come in to replace Kilman just because of his quality, his abilities, and the fact that he's naturally left-sided as well. And if we were to bring in a centre back, I think that kind of pushes Totti out as to more of an orthodox left back, and he'd likely to play more minutes in that position than he would at centre half. So with the arrival of a new starting centre back to play, probably alongside Dawson to begin with, Hugo Bueno's opportunities will be limited, and I think it's really important to understand that kind of chopping up the minutes between the players is really, really important, especially if you want a tighter squad and keeping them happy. And maybe there's a scope for Hugo Bueno to go out and have a loan, or maybe produce a little bit of a profit on his sale. Talking about midfielders now, those who would have seen the kind of pre-season list will notice it was a little bit light in numbers, but we know that João Gomes and Boubacar Traoré are obviously out with their international side respectively at this moment in time. I think midfielders-wise, we're okay from a numbers perspective, but I think we need a little bit of help in terms of different qualities. You've got your combative guys there with Lamina, with João Gomes, with Boubacar Traoré. You've got your kind of metronomic passer, that tempo controller in Tommy Doyle, extra little bit of quality on the ball when it comes to passing range as well. You got guys that can carry the ball, obviously with Bellegarde, with Lamina, Gomez, Traoré, that can all carry the ball. Chiré is that little kind of bit of a wild card, I think, option in there, who will have fleeting minutes here and there. But I think while Bellegarde expects to play more and improve and show a little bit more in terms of output this season, we don't have enough in terms of goals and assists from this area of the pitch. And I think we could do with having someone who's probably a bit more of a number 10 as opposed to an 8 or a 6 that can basically contribute much more in the attacking third. I'd actually like to see someone in there with a left foot, because I think that's something that we're lacking. I think it opens up the pitch in different ways, whether it be crossing balls from the half spaces. We've been linked with someone like Thomas Lemar, who in his prime would have been a really brilliant option, but I know he's had injury troubles. I know he's not had consistent game time at Atletico Madrid as well. So it remains to be seen what kind of level of quality he has as it stands. But he's the kind of player that I think we would like to really have within our within our armory as an option to really change things up. Someone like Pablo Sarabia, I know, can do a job in the 10, but a younger version of him would probably, a younger, more mobile version of him would have probably been a really nice option to have. I just don't think he's got the physicality and the ability to affect games that he would have done in the past that you'd need in the midfield area. You need a lot more legs. You need a lot more ability to get about and be able to press than he offers us at this moment in time. And then we get onto our forwards. Like I say, we've got quite a healthy variety within our forward players at this moment in time. Jurgen Strand Larsen, really, really key signing. And I think what that means is with the... Look, I always see football teams as kind of symbiotic. Everything affects everything else. And what we've tended to do is play essentially 3 centre-halves within the back 4 when we tended to play a bit of a hybrid shape previously. You had Totti Gomez featuring as a third centre-back with Ait-Nouri often ahead of him. Sometimes it looked like a back 5, sometimes it looked like a back 4. So what we needed to do that because I think we needed a little bit of extra security because we couldn't keep the ball at the top end of the pitch long enough. Jurgen Strand Larsen hopefully gives us that ability to play a bit longer, stick the ball a little bit higher up the pitch, and then be able to build our shape around that. So I think he's going to be really, really important in that sense. Matheus Cunha is probably the one player who if Gary O'Neill had the option, would play every single minute of every single game. He is the key to our attack. He makes things happen. And again, considering he missed a chunk of last season, I expect his minutes to increase again. He's the one who maybe pick up the slack of the likely absence of Pedro Neto. And I think the rest of them will be a little bit of rotation around that. I know Hwang was a big favourite of Gary O'Neill's in terms of keeping him on the pitch to make sure he was available to score goals. But I think the burden on him to do that will be less next time round because of the presence of a number 9. I do think he will benefit from that as well. I think someone who can take the hits for him to make runs off as well would be really, really useful to him. So him and Cunha expects to, per minute, actually increase their output, which, considering Cunha was 12 goals, 7 assists, I think, overall last season. Hwang ended up in double figures for goals as well. Really, really surprising for a Wolves player to be able to do that, but I do think that'll improve. Rodrigo Gomez is an interesting one. Don't know a fat lot about him, but I think the ability to have someone who's a genuine wide player, can play off both flanks. We only really had Pedro Neto, who was that type of player last season. So again, player to change games, a player to target certain teams, a player to, have that kind of youthful effervescence that you need in a forward line as well, a bit of a no fear kind of mentality. And you saw again, he has output from his time at Estoril last year. So really looking forward to see how he settles in. Pablo Sarabia is someone I think I would be surprised if he spends a long time playing this season. He probably played more minutes than he would have expected to, based on his the injuries that we obviously suffered in the forward line. He ended up needing to basically prop up a couple of kids in attack towards the end of last season. So he could be a useful player again off the bench in certain games. When you expect a little bit more possession, but I do wonder how much longer he has at the club and whether he's an option to actually leave. And Chiquinho, again, I'm interested to see what Gary O'Neill thinks of him. He's obviously come back from a really serious injury. Whether he has the same kind of physical capacity that he did in previous when he prior to his injury, and he was really, really looking promising as a wide option for us. It'd be interesting to know whether O'Neill thinks he can impact the Premier League. There is obvious interest from Sporting in Portugal, who would like him to join them. He showed promise on loan last season in Portugal as well. So it's a big question mark over his future. But I know he's someone that fans really like to watch and were really excited about before that really serious injury that he suffered in a pre-season friendly last year. But ultimately, I think we're not in a bad spot. If we were to go in with the team as it is this season, it's not a really terrible spot to be in. But when you think about the kind of quality of player that we'd be losing, the likes of Max Kilman, the likes of Pedro Neto, you want proven quality to kind of come in and pick up that slack. So where when it comes to centre back, I'd love to have a left-sided player who is experienced, aerially dominant, can really cover large spaces as well. And then that extra midfielder who I think we don't necessarily need a wide player to pick up the output that we're losing with Pedro Neto. I think we need a little bit more to come from the middle of the pitch. And I think someone who can play off their left foot, can assist with quality, can score goals, that sort of stuff. I think that's a really useful addition. But let me know what you guys think. I've got a lot of optimism around Gary O'Neill and the fact that he's taking charge of his first pre-season manager. I've got a lot of faith in what Matt Hobbs is doing as well. I think he's done a really good job with his incomings at this point so far. And I'm expecting a little bit more left field activity, much like the Jurgen Strand Larsen deal. So let me know what you think and where else you think we can improve and what we might need.